What makes a successful life insurance agent? Well, today I'm going to share some key factors on how I was a top producer at the Hartford selling mortgage protection when I first got in the industry like 17 years ago, and ended up years later when I first got into final expense sales, end up being the number one final expense agent selling the product that Five Star Life Insurance Company had. Meanwhile, I was selling a bunch of other products too. And then 3 years in a row, right after that, I was the number one final expense agent for Security National Life. Again, while I was selling multiple products. And this was years ago. But the idea is I want to share a little bit about my experience, how it happened, and I'm going to address three things. So first, please give the video a thumbs up. We do suggest subscribing if you're new to the channel. The three main things that I am going to cover for you today is failure, okay? How I failed multiple times and I never gave up. You should definitely keep going no matter what your failures are. Number two, leads. Look, my wife and I, when we first got into final expense, we already knew the value of leads. We already understood it. So we're going to talk a little bit about how I came up with money for leads, like at the point where I really didn't have money, but we figured it out. And how I went from being really horrible, like one of the worst agents in the office that I worked at when I was a Hartford agent, to being the number one agent, like month after month after month after month. Nobody could even touch me, come near me, actually. Stick around to the end of the video. I'm going to show you how to get the free new agent Telesales super file. Guys, you want this if you're selling life insurance remotely. It has a bunch of cool stuff in there. Again, stick around to the end of the video. I'm going to show you how to get this for yourself. So let's talk a little bit about my failures. Now, when I was a Hartford agent, they had a system. I was kind of local. Where I lived, I could end up driving 1 hour south or 1 hour north. So thankfully, that was the territory. And because of that, when I first started selling final expense, my mindset was that way too. My mindset was, well, I can stay local and sell final expense. I was wrong. So I had to learn the hard way. Selling final expense in Fort Lauderdale was really hard. Miami was even harder. And really the reason being is because these heavily populated areas, a lot of really, really, really low, like lower than normal income folks, it seemed like, live there and already have the insurance or have already had it multiple times. So my experience was there was times when I'd go into someone's house and they would already have like 3 life insurance policies. So it was just hard. And plus the city mentality, what I didn't realize is South Florida, there's this weird attitude. There's this I know everything attitude. So you got people that can't balance a checkbook that really think they know what's best for themselves. And so it was a battle just to convince them to buy the insurance when they would tell you they need the insurance. It just seemed like there was a trust factor there. It's this big city mentality that goes with it. So they kind of feel like they know everything, plus the trust factor. It was just really hard. What we ended up doing, my wife and I ended up doing, is basically traveling throughout Florida. So we found a bunch of smaller like towns. So there are more rural areas. We did mail drops there because that's what we were doing years ago. We did face-to-face and dropping mail, direct mail leads was the way to go. Again, it's probably not that way today as much. That's a different video for a different day. But we would hit these rural areas, but then we would find these small towns that had these urban areas too. So we did like the small cities and the rural areas. And we found out that that worked really, really well. But understand, let's be clear. Meanwhile, I had already done mail drops in Fort Lauderdale and completely failed. I had done mail drops in Miami and completely failed. So now we took this big chance on traveling. The areas that we worked when we had all of our success, when I was the number one agent for all those companies, we were driving 2 to 4 hours to. So I always had like a 3-hour limit. If I'm driving over 3 hours, I won't come back in the same day. So I would plan accordingly. Basically what I do, if I was doing like 3 hours or more, I would stay in a hotel, and they weren't nice hotels that we stayed in when we sold back then. I'd stay the night in the hotel and then work the second day too, instead of coming home in the same day. So that to me was kind of like, you know, how I found success. I had to fail. I had to try different things. And finally, I actually found areas that worked really well. And I hate to say this, until we beat them up year after year, those better areas kind of got harder and harder. The ones that we did high volume in, there were times when I would do 8 to 12 applications in a single day. Those numbers got cut in half and tend to keep getting worse and worse and worse. So unfortunately, any area that you really work, you basically overwork, it's going to get harder to sell in that area. One of the things that we had issues with because of those failures, those early failures, was leads. Okay, not just leads, but buying the leads. We did these mail drops in Miami, a couple of them. We were spending thousands of dollars getting nowhere. Then we did it again in Fort Lauderdale. Same problem. Fort Lauderdale was a little bit better, but we sold something. But it was like, we were just like trying to get by. We were getting deeper in debt. And at one point, what we started doing was we started having yard sales, like monthly yard sales. And I even sold part of my gun collection, got thousands of dollars. And thankfully, when I sold the gun collection, that was when we realized, oh, we got to hit these rural areas. We got to start traveling. And that was when it actually started working. And the funny thing was, when we made those changes, we were working really long, hard hours. The money started coming in. We started getting out of debt. Like 6 months later, we were no longer in debt. We had money that we could spend. It was a really nice thing. It was all about really putting in the work, but it came down to those leads. Another thing about the leads is, the one thing I learned year after year, and when I learned this as a Hartford agent, if you skip a week without fresh exclusive leads, you're going to have issues. Those are going to be weeks that are going to be harder. They could lead to the next week being harder. Momentum has to roll upon itself. When I sold Final Expense, that year that I was the top agent for the different companies 4 years in a row, I didn't go 1 week without leads. During Christmas, I didn't work a big part of that holiday, right? We didn't work like, the day before Christmas or the day after. There were several days that we didn't work, but I still had leads coming in. When we finally started qualifying for vacations, for insurance conventions, and we would travel for a week or two, I still had leads coming in. I still paid for leads. So I'd get back from vacation, and there were times, I'm not exaggerating, where we had hundreds of exclusive leads waiting for us. And with direct mail, those things were costing back then, were costing like right around $26 is what we started paying for them. Eventually, they ended up being more like $40 each. That was when the ROI was no longer there. But at the end of the day, guys, skipping weeks without leads is a huge fail. That is the kiss of death for the life insurance agent. This is the game changer. This is what really, really changed things for me. The very first time I recorded myself in a house with the client, everything was different. Once I did that, I actually recorded myself with the client and I listened to the recording. I remember driving home from Miami. It was an hour drive and I'm listening to myself and I hated it. It sounded horrible. I didn't realize I had no energy. I had no enthusiasm. I was saying things that I didn't realize I was saying, and I was coming off in a way that I didn't realize I was being perceived. So I'm thinking I'm being smooth and professional. I sounded like a schmuck. I sounded terrible. So the nice thing about it was I took that recording and I said, you know what? I got nothing to lose. My boss was saying, let me guess, you were monitored. They knew. They were telling me to record myself for weeks and I wouldn't do it. I was afraid to bring it in the house and put it in front of the client. Everything they said I was doing was right. I thought I was this smooth professional. I was an idiot. That's why I was one of the worst agents there. Overnight, I said, forget it. I'm going to put on the insurance show. I'm going to use a lot of energy. I changed a lot of things that I was saying and I practice it. And from that point on, it was pretty much literally overnight. I went from being one of the worst agents to being in that top 3 agents at the office. And within a couple more months, I made a couple other changes. I decided I wasn't going to accept objections anymore. And I started fighting for each sale harder. That was like a second step. And when I did that, I went from being the top 3 agent to being number 1. Like I just left the crowd. It was me and everybody else way behind me. That's what you can do. If you put in the time, if you put in the effort, if you do what you have to do to be successful. And I'm going to suggest, and you've probably heard me say before, a couple of the books that I recommend are The Way of the Wolf. And there's also a couple of good NLP books too that I'm going to recommend. If you get the Way of the Wolf and read that through. And if you want a copy of the free New Agent Telesales file, again, email me at doug@ufesonline.com if you'd like that free New Agent Telesales file. And if you email me, ask me, hey, Doug, what was the NLP book that you were talking about? Hopefully you guys got something out of this. Go ahead and reach out to me for the free sales materials. If you'd like more information on working with me, whether you do telesales on our remote preset appointments, if you want 30 appointments a day, we can make that happen. If you're a producer and you know, I just need the people to talk to, we can get you booked where you're making a dozen presentations a day. We can make that happen one way or another. If you're doing face-to-face, we have a great platform for that too. Just shoot me an email at that same address, doug@ufesonline.com. Guys, as always, when you put the needs of your clients first, everything else will usually fall right into place. So get out there or get on that headset, but whatever happens, just make sure that you do something good for someone else today. Happy hunting.